Good afternoon, attendees. This is Mary Sue Barrett, President of the Metropolitan Planning Council. It is just 2 o'clock, and so since we have quite a few people registered, we're going to allow a couple of minutes for people to join us. So please stay tuned for a minute or two. Good afternoon again from Mary Sue Barrett at the Metropolitan Planning Council. We have more than 100 people already logged in, but there are more registered, so we're just going to give it a minute more before we get started. Thank you for being patient. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mary Sue Barrett, President of the Metropolitan Planning Council, and I'm just thrilled to welcome more than 300 of you who have registered for today's conversation about equitable prosperity. We are really thrilled to have you and our expert panelists today. One of the people that you won't have a chance to meet on screen is MPC's Director of Land Use and Planning, Christina Harris. I want to sincerely thank Christina for putting together such a fascinating, informative panel and for all the ways that you help drive our agenda on good planning. The Metropolitan Planning Council's vision and mission is to build a better, bolder, more equitable future for everyone in this region. And we know right now it's not working for everyone. In this moment of unprecedented challenges, we are coming together around a Build Back Better agenda. And we have found that our virtual events are a really important way to shape that strategy. So thank you for being a part of that. This panel discussion is part of a series that AECOM has been conducting with our sister organizations in New York, in the New York region, the Regional Plan Association, and in the Bay Area, SPUR. So we are delighted that AECOM has partnered with us, and it's truly because of our partnerships across community, government, and business organizations that we get things done. We appreciate your support, AECOM, and your team's expertise, which helped structure today's conversation. A few technology tips. This session is being recorded, and a link will be provided later to you, attendees, and to the general public. We are also offering closed captioning for those who need it, and please check your toolbar for that. When you have questions, please enter them in the Q&A box, not the chat box. We will be answering questions drawn from the Q&A box. The panel moderator is Metropolitan Planning Council's Vice President, Josh Ellis, and both Josh and Christina will be moderating those questions to pose to our panelists in a little bit. Why is there a need for middle-income jobs more urgently now than ever? Well, the coronavirus pandemic has highlighted structural inequalities that have always existed. These were ones that we documented when MPC did a cost of segregation analysis several years ago. Starting in March, businesses shut down. Many Chicago area residents became unemployed. Black and brown communities were particularly hard hit. Check out these maps that were prepared just for you by MPC's research director, Dan Cooper. The size of the red dots correspond to the number of COVID-19 cases on the left in early April and on the right in mid-June. And the darker shade of the blue represents higher percentage African Americans. You've heard the painful reality. Many, many more Blacks have contracted and died from this disease due to underlying health vulnerabilities. And looking at the next slide, we see a disturbingly similar trend in COVID-19 cases among Latinx individuals whose contraction rates have spiked more recently. Many families throughout the city and suburbs have undocumented members and have entirely missed out on stimulus funding. As we determine how to build back better, raising family incomes and generating wealth in communities that have been isolated due to structural racism is a top priority for MPC and so many of our partners. While many of us have faced inconveniences and isolation due to work from home, unlike our essential workers, we can work from home. This last set of maps clearly show the trend of suburbanization of poverty and that our hourly wage essential workers are literally putting their lives at risk for all of us. Chicago's industrial corridors offer ripe opportunities to grow middle-income jobs in sustainable industries. These jobs do typically pay more than those in the retail and in the service sectors, and they can evolve into a longer-term career. Plus, since 2010, we've seen these industrial jobs, or jobs in industrial corridors, grow more than 4% annually. Today's event will feature a grounding in data before we jump into a discussion with our inspiring panel. These panelists are connecting employees with job opportunities. They are supporting customized training, and they are advocating for better community outcomes in jobs that really help people advance. In a moment, you'll hear from Bill Abolt from AECOM, who will provide some compelling data that argue for focusing even more so on Chicago's industrial corridors as an area for growth and community connection. That will set the stage for our conversation, which is moderated by MPC's own Vice President, Josh Ellis. I'm delighted to introduce you now to Stephen Engblom, Executive Vice President and Global Cities Director at AECOM. He'll provide some welcoming remarks. Stephen serves on the board of our peer organization in the Bay Area, SPUR, and is a bold voice for reinventing cities. So glad you're with us today, Stephen. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Sue. It's been a real pleasure working with you and your team to bring this program to life. As you mentioned, the pandemic and the civic awakening to the Black Lives Matter movement has foregrounded structural challenges that we've known have been there simmering, but this has really foregrounded these issues. And AECOM believes strongly in the role that groups like MPC, RPA, and SPUR are playing in your respective cities to assemble diverse perspectives so that we can develop innovative responses to economic, environmental, and equity challenges. It's conversations like these that help us understand best practices between cities around the world. In San Francisco, you mentioned the parallel program, so I thought I would just mention that for the audience in San Francisco, we're having a similar discussion to this, but we're focused on transportation networks. And in New York, we're working with the RPA and looking at building energy programs and their implications. So with that, it's my distinct pleasure to introduce my colleague, Bill Abolt. Bill is a vice president at AECOM. He leads our smart energy practice and focuses on energy, sustainability, and smart, resilient urban infrastructure in some of the largest metropolitan economies in North America. Previously, Bill served as Environment Commissioner, Director of the Office of Budget and Management, and Chief of Management Office of the Mayor for the City of Chicago. He also is an adjunct instructor in Public Policy and Administration at the University of Illinois, Chicago, and Northwestern University. Bill.
Thanks, Stephen. And I really want to start by thanking MPC for the opportunity to talk to you today. And also to thank the Chicago Department of Planning and Development. Much of the analysis that we're going to present to you today was prepared by AECOM on their behalf as they looked at the current operation and the future of industrial corridors across the city. Let's go to the next slide, please. The purpose of the presentation today is to provide some context to the discussion on industrial corridors. I want to talk a little bit about the economic opportunities that exist, the diversity of those opportunities, what exists currently, and the trends that are really shaping the future. But I also want to talk about some of the challenges that make jobs inaccessible to the people that need them most, and challenges that impact the health and quality of life of nearby communities. You know, in preparing for the panel, a number of the panelists discussed the need to both grab the opportunity, but also ensure that the unintended consequence of some of this activity does not go unaddressed. So let's move on to the next slide, please. I want to start with the challenges and concerns. There is an undeniable increase in truck traffic due to the rise of e-commerce and intermodal shipping. Those activities, and I'll describe them in a little more detail on a forthcoming slide, are resulting in significant increases in traffic, not just within the industrial corridors, but in surrounding neighborhoods. Additionally, zoning and land use controls haven't kept up with the level of activity and the changes. And this is part of a larger problem of historic land use regulation and uses that are simply incompatible today. These shortfalls are compounded by other regulatory gaps and legacy issues that have a particular impact on air quality for adjacent communities and the city as a whole. Many of the communities closest to the corridors face high levels of respiratory and other health challenges that can't be ignored and must be addressed. Finally, the reality is that even though they're nearby, many community residents lack access to these opportunities. There's no sustainable economic strategy that can ignore or fail to address these challenges. The strategy will require significant coordination among city agencies, other level of government, and key stakeholders. Move to the next slide, please. So let's talk about some of the specific data and analysis. First, as I pointed out, there has been a significant growth. 52% of all of intermodal lifts, 52% of all of the lifts in the region take place in 8 yards in or adjacent to the city of Chicago. That's a growth of 56,000 lifts since the year 2000. This activity is taking place both in the industrial corridors, but as I mentioned before, it's also resulting in significant truck traffic adjacent to the industrial corridors. As importantly, though the growth has been steady at 2%, all of the projections that we've looked at in the near to midterm show no end in sight. This is a reality of a changing economy and a reality that must be addressed, both in terms of making sure that residents have access to the jobs and making sure that the consequences of that truck traffic are addressed. I think importantly, as this slide points out, it's interesting to look at the places that the intermodal containers are coming from. You know, places like the Port of LA and Long Beach are addressing these very specific issues. They can be addressed, and with good public action and private cooperation, many of the disparate impacts associated with this activity can be addressed and reduced. Let's move on to the next slide, please. Why is there such a concentration on the industrial corridors? They are a significant source of jobs, and they're a significant source of job growth. There's nearly 40,000 new industrial jobs that have been created in the industrial corridors since 2010. It's about 20% of all of Chicago jobs are located in and around the industrial corridors. The growth of those jobs has been significant. The diversity of those jobs is significant, and the ability of people to gain access to those jobs, depending with varying levels of training and preparedness, is significant. And these are jobs that generally are paying about $9,000 a year above the average wage of most Chicago residents. Let's move to the next one, please. And again, as you'll note on that slide and some of the others, this information is made available through the Department of Planning and Development, and we provided a link on where you can get access to those on the city's website. All industrial corridors are not created equal, and certain corridors have seen a significant concentration of jobs. About 70%, nearly 70% of the jobs are concentrated in the west, central, and southwest regions of the city. And they've seen significant growth. The southeast and far south side, areas that have also some of the biggest challenges in terms of historic uses, have seen a net decrease in total jobs over the period of time, as well as their relative share of industrial jobs overall. So a sustainable and effective strategy for the city has to recognize and address these differences to ensure that all Chicagoans can benefit. We move on to the next slide, please. Let's talk about the people that live near and adjacent to the industrial corridors. You know, nearly more than 1/3 of Chicagoans live close to an industrial corridor. And those Chicagoans tend to be significantly below the citywide average in terms of income. So industrial corridor neighbors tend to be poorer, and that issue must be addressed. Please move on to the next slide. I think one of the really interesting opportunities and challenges related to the city's industrial corridor program and ensuring that we secure the best benefit for all Chicagoans is the diversity of opportunities that exist within them now. Yes, it's warehousing and moving commodities, but it also includes advanced and historical manufacturing opportunities. It includes food service and a broad variety of opportunities. Those opportunities create challenges, certainly, in terms of developing strategies for people to gain access to the jobs, for creating the right mix of incentives, but it also creates opportunities by creating more job pathways for more people. Let's go to the next slide, please. So the purpose, as I mentioned, the purpose of the presentation was just to create a context, to make it clear what the challenges were and what the opportunity. We're going to leave to the panel the discussion of what the solutions are. But we want to leave the presentation with three kind of key points. The problem and the opportunities, and there is no sustainable path unless the challenges are adequately addressed. The strategies that have to be developed have to ensure an appropriate level of access to jobs for Chicago residents, particularly those that are most in need. Those are both workforce development challenges, but they're also infrastructure and connectivity challenges that must be addressed. That's particularly important because many of these same communities have significant transportation problems in terms of gaining access to job centers beyond the city of Chicago and throughout the region. Regulatory reform is a necessity, and that regulatory reform does not just fall on the city of Chicago or any one agency of the city of Chicago. This is a complex mix of state, federal, and local regulatory challenges that must be addressed and must be addressed effectively and collaboratively, particularly to ensure that environmental justice issues are addressed and that populations with significant respiratory challenges get relief. And finally, the incentives associated with development and new jobs and opportunity have to be aligned. They have to be aligned with the objectives of minimizing impact. They have to be aligned with objectives of creating opportunity and ensuring that that opportunity is available to all. So with that, I'll turn it over to the panel and look forward to a lively discussion.
Thanks, Bill, and I would invite all of our speakers to turn on their video and their microphones now. My name is Josh Ellis. I am Vice President here at the Metropolitan Planning Council. Happy to moderate today's discussion. We have 9 panelists today. We have 4 questions that we've prepared in advance. And we're going to work through those, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions submitted by the audience, which would, again, encourage you to use the Q&A function that you'll see in the bottom bar. And we've already had a couple questions submitted there, so thank you for that. Our panelists today come from a variety of walks of life and bring a number of perspectives to the table. And you can see here on the screen, Olga Batista with the Alliance for the Great Lakes and a longtime organizer on the Southeast side. Chris Brewer with AECOM. Dave Doig from Chicago Neighborhood Initiatives. Keep going. Malia Giersma, a senior attorney with the Natural Resources Defense Council. Dale Margillis from Elevate Energy. Dan Lurie, the Chief of Policy in Mayor Lightfoot's administration for the City of Chicago. Karen Northington Reeves, the CEO of the Chicago Cook Workforce Partnership. Juan Salgado, the Chancellor of the City of Colleges of Chicago. And Aom Siengo, Vice President with Skills for Chicagoland's Future. So nine panelists, 4 questions. We'll spend 10 to 15 minutes on each one. And to kick it off, we're going to start with Juan from City Colleges. And the opening question is, what do you, from the position that you're in, see as the major challenges facing businesses, communities, employees, society at large with this challenge of building good quality middle income jobs in Chicago? Juan?
Thank you, Josh and Mary Sue, for the opportunity to be a part of this discussion. I think when you think about it from the vantage point of community residents, and we serve 70,000 students from across the city of Chicago that are Chicagoans. They're from Chicago neighborhoods, and they look out on a city that has economic opportunity, where people are working, where these industries, have produced jobs and continue to have jobs available even today. And so, what we need to do is make sure that we're making the requisite investments in order to ensure that those local residents can be connected to jobs and the kind of jobs that are being produced today. And so, look, I'm very pleased that at City Colleges of Chicago, we made those investments. You can imagine we as a community college system for many years just had, boxes of, facilities for liberal arts education. We now have several wings dedicated to these high demand occupations, a new transportation distribution logistics center at Olive Harvey College, a new manufacturing and engineering technology center at Richard J. Daley College. So when you look at and the Dawson Technical Institute, which we've had a long time in construction on the south side. So when you look at where these facilities are located, they're located also where these jobs are being created. And what we need to do and have been doing and are already moving forward with is talk to the employers, figure out what specific training is required, map that out, get the right facilities with the right equipment and the right know-how, and stay up to date with that know-how so that we are actually pipelining our local populations into these opportunities. And so we've put together, just in the last 3 years, a little over $100 million investment in these facilities in order to be prepared to pipeline people into these jobs. But I will say that it's really important that we understand that it's not just about jobs; it's about the quality of those jobs, and the quality of those jobs. Where there are higher skill requirements, we see a higher job quality, higher pay, better benefits. But I think we also need to be pushing, to ensure that at all levels of these companies, we have a strong job quality for local residents.
Thanks, Juan. Just as a quick follow-up, you mentioned the need to keep up with the pace of technology and technological change. Could you share a success story from City Colleges of an area where we have been able to keep pace? Because it seems like the bureaucracy and the budgets and the public spending could slow that down. Where have we been able to do it well? What can we learn from it?
Yeah, well, we've got several examples. Obviously, the new Malcolm X in healthcare, but you know, is where we built a virtual hospital working very closely with the healthcare community. But going into sort of to the field of manufacturing, if you will, come to our Manufacturing Technology and Engineering Center, and you will see the latest equipment that is being used on the shop floors of manufacturers in Chicago. And you will see a curriculum that's built specifically for the jobs that those companies have today. Same thing over at Olive Harvey. And so, you know, you will see in supply chain management a room similar to what you'll see at any company that is doing, you know, logistics, supply chain management today. And so when our students leave that education and they go into the work world, it's not going to look very different. It's not even a simulated situation in many respects. It's the actual, you know, reality of what you're going to experience. And it makes our students that much more marketable.
Great, thank you. Ayo, you want to jump in here from Skills for Chicagoland's Future? What's your take? Big challenges facing workers, business, communities, all of us, and how we provide these middle income jobs.
Yeah, in addition to, thank you, Josh, you know, in addition to what Juan has spoken to so far, you know, I would argue, I would add on to that, ensuring access. Look, some folks just don't know what they don't know. When we talk about industrial corridors, when we talk about some of the work that's happening there, look, the idea of access, some folks just don't know what they don't know. And so there's a bit of a marketing campaign, there's a bit of alignment. When you're in a neighborhood, you have got to be able to reach out to local workers, right? To make yourselves part of the neighborhood, part of the community, help folks understand how they can be engaged in this new line of work that's emerging. You know, Bill certainly took us through some of the major sort of factors that are pointing to a lot of the industrial work. But again, important for us to sort of wrap our arms around the fact that you know, some folks just aren't looking there, and there's a bit of an imbalance, right? We see opportunity there. We don't necessarily see alignment, but that's something that, look, at city colleges, with nonprofits across the city, we're looking to align both the workers to these opportunities that are happening sort of across the region. Look, there's also something around, you know, being local stewards of opportunity. Whenever you are embedded in a local neighborhood, you become a part of that neighborhood. And so you have a lot of actors both on this call and across the city who can help navigate those connections to local stakeholders, including those job seekers. Look, the demand is strong in corridors, and there are ways that have proven, there are ways that are working right now to align both demand with interested supply and vice versa. And frankly, right now is a great time to hire, as the pool of open applicants has grown 10x in the past 90 days.
Fantastic, yeah. It seems that we even had a question submitted already about how do we know who is in any given corridor? How do we know who is holding the jobs? Is it local residents? If these corridors are in Black and brown communities, is it the local residents that are holding them? Or is it folks with skills from other places responding to opportunities in the market? What is your take on how we best match local jobs to local residents, but how we also match the needs of high skill positions with folks who have those high skills wherever they may be? How do we balance all that?
If that question is to me, look,
yeah.
I don't think it's you know, it shouldn't escape us that, you know, again, I think a lot of the folks that are on this webinar are doing just that. I think it's more of a how do we combine our resources, right? A lot of us are talking to each other. We have to really understand what that demand is so that we can activate the response to that demand. You know, look, I think in this moment, now more than ever, you know, working together, quite frankly, is going to be how we're going to address this problem of this huge increase in unemployment alongside this health crisis. But some of the underlying factors that have gotten us to this point have not escaped us yet. But again, I think I point more to these opportunities for alignment, for aligning training, aligning job development, aligning the supply, but then this sort of boom with employers who are actually embracing the moment that we're in. Right, and there's really no opportunities for closed doors. Like, everybody's engaged, everybody's involved, and it's really sort of being able to bring your solutions to the table and work in partnership to respond. Again, employers have the demand. We're seeing that right now. Postings are up. We're tracking those postings. Demand, obviously, even though there's going to be an imbalance in the number of people who are looking for jobs, we can help to sort of alleviate that while also pointing people to the training that's going to be needed after we get out of this situation. As we all know, some of the jobs that we are losing right now are not going to come back or won't come back in the same form. And so at the same time, while we're focusing on putting people back to work, we're also focusing on putting them into training so we can start beginning to look at how we can be competitive and skills responsive in 2021 and beyond.
Great. Chris from AECOM, Bill gave a great opening presentation about some of the opportunities and challenges here. What would you like to add here on this major challenges facing us, whether it's communities, businesses, individuals?
You know, fundamentally, I think part of the real challenge is that the nature of manufacturing has changed so fundamentally over the last 10 to 20 years. Going from 20 years ago where we're primarily pounding metal, now these days we're using software and computers to mold metal, potentially 3D printing it, again, doing things in a very different way. And I think what this boils down to is for many residents who look across the street at an industrial corridor, it's one thing to see an ICNC in the Kinsey corridor and appreciate a set of small and mid-sized businesses potentially involved in making food or apparel, to what would look like on the surface as just a very large warehouse where in some cases it's being used by a third-party logistics provider who is actually doing component assembly and paying higher wages than just say an average wage for a truck driver. So I think that dynamic of when we talk about what an industrial job is versus what a manufacturing job is actually really important in terms of understanding that not only do we have a manufacturing sectors with well-paying jobs, but also frankly in warehouse or in the wholesale sector, we're seeing a number of areas where the wages are actually very competitive. And frankly in food, we're seeing a number of companies that are seen as classified in wholesale rather than manufacturing, but they're actually, processing and making food. So again, thinking about that diversity of employment opportunities really speaks to the challenge of how do we get our employers to identify and create these new pathways to get employees, particularly from the neighborhoods, into some of these jobs. It's a unique and highly challenging and very volatile environment, to say the least.
Thanks, Chris. Dave, if you want to jump in here live from the front lawn at Pullman National Monument, it appears, and about, a quarter mile behind that building is sort of the epicenter of where a lot of this is happening on the south side. Tell us from your perspective and Chicago Neighborhood Initiatives, what are the big challenges you see facing us and where have we seen some growth in?
Yeah, so thanks, Josh. I think a lot of this has been touched on, but we typically start as community developers. We look at kind of an asset-based approach, and so fundamentally each neighborhood has assets in the area that we're at in the Calumet region. And Chancellor Salgado touched on this. Our real strength is our transportation infrastructure. We have the finest transportation infrastructure of any place in North America. When you think about the 6 Class A railroads, the roadway infrastructure, as well as the port. So our focus is really at building on this whole TDL approach. It has been to promote and develop a transportation, distribution, and logistics infrastructure that really plays to the strengths of the region. And so whether it's things like the Method Factory or the Whole Foods Distribution Center, where we actually just next week are announcing we built a 400,000 square foot spec industrial building. It's no longer spec. SC Johnson is taking the whole thing. And then we're also working on the city's first Amazon distribution center. And so I think, this really does speak to the assets of the region. And there are many, many former steel sites in our area that can be redeveloped and positioned for that industry. I totally commend the city colleges and Chicago State now in focusing on that and using Olive Harvey as a training tool for it. And then similarly, we're starting to work with, I know Dan Sweeney and Ed Coleman are on the webinar. We're looking at something similar on the west side in North Lawndale for advanced manufacturing. Again, working kind of with the resources, the assets of the area, and focusing on how do we create those kind of advanced manufacturing jobs, and then being intentional about linking community residents with that. So one of the things that we've tried to do on all of our developments is to have community benefits agreements. You touched on how do we make sure that neighborhood residents are getting access to those jobs and keeping those jobs. And so in any of our deals, we've negotiated community benefits agreement with the various employers. And for the most part, the employers have welcomed that. I mean, they're many times coming in from other areas. They need access to employees. And so as opposed to, approaching this as a barrier or some kind of a club, we've kind of turned it around and said, no, it's actually an incentive. We can help you find local residents that are qualified to access those jobs, and then work with them to keep them employed and grow them into those kind of living wage jobs that can support a family.
Great, thank you, David. Olga, want to jump in here? I think we've heard a lot about some of the growth and opportunities we've seen. Your take on some of the challenges continuing to face communities, individuals, as we explore this area of middle income jobs.
Sure. Thanks for having me here today because, my family came from Mexico. My parents came to work here in the steel mills. And in, like 40 years ago when they started to close one by one, when I grew up in a neighborhood that was in a collective depression. I think the Calumet newspaper reported that within 8 years, over 600 workers had died because of alcoholism, suicide, and other issues when the steel mills closed. And then there was this desperation to find any kind of work. A lot of people left, and then we also started to notice a lot of sick people in this community. I don't think that that people in this community are against jobs. We just want jobs that are going to be able to protect us. And then when industry and trends change, these workers have been thrown away. And we've seen it happen before. So I think we have to have a much higher level of thinking when we plan what this community can look like, and definitely something that is sustainable. We have been, I didn't choose I didn't go to school to be, a community planning manager. I got involved in this because we were in survival mode, because we had a neighborhood that was just being dumped on by all kinds of industries that were here along the Calumet River. The City Inspector General of Chicago did an investigation regarding CDPH's inspections in these companies, and it was terrible. I mean, we're in terrible shape. There was companies who hadn't even had a single inspection in 5 years, like over 100 companies. And so the issue, I think, one is that the communities that are here that have already been dumped on for so long, who are in a really desperate situation, are going to want to welcome any kind of business that's going to help their families. But at the same time, some of these families are seeing like that they actually don't want to be a community that has the kind of jobs that are going to keep them sick, that are going to cause other health problems. When you have a mom who lives in Hegewisch whose son, his leg was amputated because of this rare form of cancer, and is going to the doctor, and there's 2 other children with the same kind of rare cancer, and no one's doing this research. Like the community the community members in this area have actually developed relationships with institutions like Cincinnati University, with the UIC, and are working to do their own health studies and to bring in the data that we need to address these issues. So we can't just keep building and moving 100 miles an hour without thinking about how these plans and these ideas are going to be impacting people who live in this community. And I think that right now, I'm very distracted right now as I'm here presenting, because tomorrow the IEPA is supposed to make a decision regarding an air permit for General Iron, which, as you guys know, the north side, folks by the North Branch have been fighting for years because of this terrible company who is just not able to control their emissions, has been putting people at great risk. And the way that this process has played out, where this company is now moving to the southeast side, I mean, it's absolute, we don't stand a chance, right? Like, these developers that want that area to be, you know, like another vein of the downtown with like tall gleaming buildings and beautiful parkways, and they don't give a shit where the stuff that's there is going to end up and the kind of impacts that it's going to bring the people in my community. And that's a huge problem, that we see that we've done all the things that we could do, right? The people in this community we show up on a regular basis and meet with the Department of Public Health. We advise on new metal shredding rules. We bring people to testify, but our voices don't matter as much as these corporations' voices matter, because even as these plans are happening and we're providing the data that we have to come up with ourselves. Like the city, the state, the US EPA tells the community, prove to us that there is a problem here. And so this is so on top of like us wanting to like have a vision for our community and what this industrial corridor can look like, we're also putting out fires, and we're also trying to organize and do the research and bring out this, the data that's needed. So I have been working on the Industrial Corridor Modernization Initiative with folks from MPC and CNT and other amazing folks. NRDC Malia, here, she's here on the panel as well. And what we discovered in like trying to find out like, what are like the health impacts, what are the public health impacts of the industry and the activity that's happening along the Calumet River to the people in the community. And a lot of the information that we're going to be putting out is going to be baseline information, because no one's done the research. So we're over here moving 100 miles an hour and making plans for the future of this industrial corridor, and we don't even know the impacts to public health. A lot of it has been anecdotal. So I think that there has to be a balance. We want jobs. We want sustainability. We have other issues here that really are not getting addressed currently, like the issues of flooding. You know, we share sewer systems with industries here. So when our neighborhood gets water in their basements, we don't know if it's toxic water that's coming out from the runoff from a lot of these companies that are here in the Calumet River. There's so many issues. Yep. And I could take up the whole time of this panel to talk to you about the problems that we have and the challenges that we have seen, because we get asked all the time by groups to participate in visioning plans when we're like a neighborhood on fire with all these different crises that are going on. If it's not manganese, it's pet coke, or, you know, now we're worried about the emissions from these metal shredders. And it's very difficult to just pivot and switch gears. And I feel like it's a luxury to be able to sit back and just envision and have that time to see like what this neighborhood can look like. But I can tell you what we don't want. And that is the kind of industry that hurts us. Some of these air permits, like the one that we're talking about with General Iron, they don't even have to include the emissions from all the semi trucks that are going to be coming in and out of that facility. How messed up is that? It's still the same air. So the way that the EPA and the way the city of Chicago compartmentalize all of these different issues and separates them, we don't have a clear vision of what it is, what the whole of this issue really is, and how it's going to impact people in our community.
Olga, so thank you. And thank you for all you do and have done over the years. We're going to come back to this in another question about needed policy solutions, needed interventions, needed things, and look forward to sharing your take on that along with Malia and Dan and some others. One additional question on the workforce, the sort of training part here, which speaks a little bit to what Olga was just talking about changes in technology, changes in industry, and the workers that either get left behind or get caught up with it. Karin, if you could jump in here to talk about what we are seeing in success for employer partnerships to make sure that folks are keeping up with the skills needed for the industries that we're trying to pursue and we're trying to make happen here.
Sure. So, what we've seen historically in the past is this siloed train and pray model where we train people up and pray they get a job. And it really, that has not worked. It has not worked. And so when the Chicago Cook Workforce Partnership was formed 8 years ago, we really focused on making sure that all of the work within the public workforce system was, number one, data driven, and number two, rooted in what employers articulate to us that they need. So we spent a lot of time discerning employer need and then collaborating with them around the creation of different programs. And the other piece that I think, I'd be remiss if I didn't lift up is that in the recent weeks, with all of the civil unrest that's happened, rooted in this notion of racial justice and equity, all of the work that we're doing within the workforce system, as far as I'm concerned, racial equity is a workforce development issue. It absolutely has to be at the forefront of our thinking when we're talking about this work within the city of Chicago, because where we've got the most entrenched roots of poverty are in the south and west sides of Chicago. It's where we have the largest Black and brown communities. And so all of this is really, from my vantage point, in terms of the work that we do, it's really about helping our employers understand the untapped potential within our communities, because there are so many stigmas that are attached to folks within our communities. Even in our own discussions, we talk about folks as though they don't have capacity, as though they don't have skills. And the reality is that the resilience, the perseverance, the persistence, the ability to withstand all sorts of barbs and slights and arrows and the types of situations that Olga just described make for incredible skills that we have to help employers understand. One of the things that we spend a lot of time working on is helping our job seekers translate their skills into the language that employers speak. So it's not that we don't have talent out there. It's not that we don't have folks out there. Yes, we need greater technical skill development, but the reality is that if we could get employers to shift the lens and look at folks through a competency-based lens, we would see a greater, I think, matching. Because what employers say to us time and time again is, we hire for personality and some base level of skill, but we will train them up and teach them the things we need to know with respect to our particular industry. And so for us, it is about making sure that folks are job ready. And then in the context of, moving beyond that train and pray and making sure that we've got that data-driven connection and that employer connection, it really is about ensuring that employers are at the table when we're devising these curricula so that we're training people for the actual technical skills that employers are saying they're needing. So we've seen tremendous success in the information technology sector, in manufacturing, in healthcare. We've seen that we've got lots of employers that are willing to come to the table and collaborate and work together in terms of creating these curricula, and that they are actually hiring people into well beyond the entry-level jobs, into jobs that actually yield family-sustaining wages and are competitive and, most importantly, poised for career pathway development.
Thank you. Delmar from Elevate Energy, and you guys do a variety of work, which maybe you can describe a little bit, but what's your take on this? What is working to make sure that we're getting employees into the industries of the future?
Yeah. I think the first thing I want to say is amen to everything that Karen said. A lot of the points that she was touching on are the same things that we're seeing as well. From the context of Elevate, where we work is in the clean energy economy. So we're working to both support programs, but also job creation and energy efficiency and renewables. And there's also been a renewed focus on water, especially with the COVID-19 challenges that we're facing. There have been limitations on access to water in underserved communities. In lieu of repeating a lot of what Karen said, because she really hit the nail on the head, you can't train and pray, and that's been kind of the process that you typically see. So a lot of our focus really has been on making sure the wraparound services are provided, because we do a lot of work in underserved communities. We also work with returning citizens, and we work with folks that have historically been unable to access the job market, not alone the clean energy economy. So having support services that provide reinforcement along the way is important. I would also say, to the point that Karen highlighted, the job side of this is critical. And especially in the clean energy economy, there is unfortunately not a lot of diversity at the employers to start with. So in addition to often showing the value of a lot of the students that we support and train from underserved communities, oftentimes a little nudge is needed as well in that process. A lot of our work is funded through state statutory requirements through the utilities. So there is a steady pipeline of energy efficiency and solar jobs available. So one of the things that we have in place is that pipeline of an industry that needs skilled workers. And so what we're trying to do is to marry up the assets and resources and communities to these job opportunities, and then not just getting them the job, but also making sure they're retained, because retention is also a key component. The last thing that I would say is one of if you ever talk to me about Elevate and our work, I can't complete a sentence without the word partnership. And the partnerships with community organizations, with the legislators that are making the laws so that the laws help support the job creation process. The utility partners are important. And also, I think there needs to be a dialogue with the labor unions in Chicago as well, because they often are highly engaged in this process of creating and retaining jobs in the clean energy space. And without partnerships with IBEW and others, we're going to really start to bang our head up against the wall. So I'll kind of pull up there, Josh, but I think the partnerships and, like I said, a big amen to everything Karen said is kind of the key to job creation, especially in the clean energy economy.
Thanks, Delmar, and thanks again, Karen. Juan, same question, but also reacting to one of the ones that's in the Q&A, that there's, according to a recent report, there's 58,000 unfilled manufacturing jobs in the Chicago region. City colleges can do so much, workforce programs can do so much. How do we scale up here to actually meet the demand of training folks for these? Is there more to be done at the high school level, other levels of education? Like, how do we meet the challenge in a fuller and more comprehensive way?
Yeah, it's got to be comprehensive, and it has to hit multiple populations. And so, when I get off this call today, Mayor Lightfoot and Janice Jackson and I are announcing a transformational partnership that we'll be entering into with Chicago Public Schools that, squarely puts the assets that we have at city colleges at the availability of students within CPS. But it just can't stop there. We've got adults in our community of all types that we need to be reaching, and it's partnership. I can't stress this enough. It's Karen and I working very closely, just as closely as we're working with CPS. We're working with the partnership, but we're also working with community-based entities. I'm going to give you one example. I know, first of all, Bethel New Life is on this call. well, what used to be Bethel New Life, I'm sorry. But we are working, to ensure that, people from the local communities on the south and west side get direct access to our programs and initiatives. We had an initiative last year that we're going to grow with a group called IMAN, Inner City Muslim Action Network, that does a lot of work with, young men in the Inglewood and West Inglewood area. We took 15 of these men. We created something called Weekend Warriors. From Friday evening till Sunday, what did they do? They occupied our new Manufacturing Technology Center on the southwest side at Richard J. Daley College. And when they emerged by Labor Day with welding certifications, not only did they stay safe and still with lives, to be quite honest with you, but also with skills that can enter into a high demand field. So we're doing this in many respects with lots of organizations. And I think that that's part of how we scale. The other part, quite frankly, is we've got to have a more robust system. When you think about what's available for higher education in terms of Pell Grants, Karen's dollars are really important. There's just not enough of them. There's just not enough dollars to help adults trying to transition in. So we've got to create new ways of supporting the adult learners, not just those high school students heading into higher education.
Karen is agreeing that she needs more money. Yes.
Well, no, that's not it. And honestly, for the amount of funding that we start, we see 140,000 people a year between our 10 comprehensive American Job Centers, as well as 50 plus community-based organizations within our network. But what I always say to folks, to Juan's point, the amount of money that we have is finite, but the need is infinite. And if you gave us $100 million tomorrow, we probably still couldn't meet the entire need. We did a story on NPR several years ago where they tried to calculate what it would take to make sure that every single person in the city of Chicago had a livable wage job and had the training and all the skills that they needed in order to compete. And it was like $730 million is what we would need to invest in every individual who was of age and capable of working. And, as I said, it's just, there's nothing sexy or glamorous about workforce development work, but it is truly what we need. It is the heart and soul of economic development. It is the thing that will propel our economy forward. But there simply is just not enough funding to do everything that needs to be done for all the people who are in need. Yep. And that's the tragedy of it.
Thank you. Let's pivot a little bit to solutions here and policy ones in particular. Dan Lurie's the Chief Policy Officer for the City of Chicago, and invite him to jump on here. We've heard a lot about challenges. We've heard a lot about opportunities. Where does this sit for you in the work that you and the administration are doing? And then the same question to Malia and a couple others after
that. A lot of thoughts. I'm not sure how to distill these down. So I think at the end of the day, we got to pay people more money. So from an anti-poverty perspective, but also to get people to fill jobs. So unemployment rate, I think, is kind of a secondary at best metric for success here. I think a number of folks have talked about kind of quality jobs, which to me means a job that you can make enough money to raise a family on. And so I think we as a city need to lead on a real place-based labor strategy. And I think that is the opportunity this city, this region is screaming for. And I think it's what we are starting to build kind of as part of this administration. I think clearly access to capital for small businesses, especially Black and brown owned businesses, is going to be crucial. That there simply is not enough money to start and maintain a business and therefore hire people. Gender gaps and pay gaps, a huge problem. The best way to get a job, good wage job and keep it is through a union. And we need to grow the labor, kind of capital L labor pool in Chicago. There's obviously tax policy implications across the board here. Safety net, if people who have jobs are feared that they will losing that job is between them and the ability to pay a medical bill or keep their heat on or take care of a family member, that is a power disparity, not to mention a kind of economic reality that I think has been pervasive in this city for 50 years. And so strengthening the safety net is got to be a crucial part of the solution here, so that there is things like unemployment insurance that's really robust, that there are job guarantees, that we're thinking about worker protections from fair work week and minimum wage, but building on that, really bringing in unregulated members of the workforce, like domestic workers, mostly women of color, who are right now operating largely outside of the city's purview and the government's purview. And are therefore being exploited, dealing with predatory practices like wage theft. So I could go on and on and on. I think all these are things that we are pursuing to some degree of urgency here at the city, in partnership with a lot of the folks on this call. But to me, I think what I've not heard, and I know it's on everyone's brain, but just wanted to elevate it, is the kind of the need for a real citywide labor conversation, small L, and tax policy. That those two things, without that, I think we are in react mode, and I fear that that's the trajectory that we'll be on for a while. And this is not me saying anything that people on my panelists don't know, but I think for audience members, I think your partnership and really working with us to be a national leader in what an overhaul of the tax code would mean, what a worker voice agenda would really mean, what an expansion, a real expansion, and a racial equity driven expansion of unions would mean, union membership would mean. How do we address the pay gap? How do we think about wealth creation? These are things that the mayor and the city are not going to be able to do alone, to put it mildly. We don't have the legal authority, we don't have the political bandwidth, and we don't have the expertise all here. It lies within the folks in the audience here, and the dynamic community groups and organizations that and the workers that make up the city. And so our job is to kind of catalyze that conversation and guide it, and work with folks here and elsewhere to shape that. But that's my very global reaction to the conversation that I've been listening to right now.
Thank you, Dan. Malia, other thoughts on policy or planning solutions to either some of the opportunities or the challenges that we've been discussing here? And I think Christina's going to pop up a map that's relevant to your answer.
Yeah, thank you, Josh, and thanks to all of the other panelists. One of the things that we discussed in the prep call for this panel was the concept of equitable distribution of benefits and burdens of our economy. And what Christina just put up in front of you is a map that the Natural Resources Defense Council put together with some of our community partners in close partnership in the southeast side and along the southwest corridor. And what this map shows is the cumulative environmental burdens on communities using census block level data, census tract level data across Chicago. The crosshatched areas you see overlaid with this colorful map are the industrial corridors. And as you can see, I think a couple things pop out here. One is that not all of the industrial corridors overlay with similarly colored portions of the map. And what that says to me is that not every industrial corridor is the same. And so we shouldn't be talking about them with a singular voice. And we shouldn't be thinking about policy considering each of them in a vacuum. They are all interrelated. They are all part of the city's economy. And so there needs to be a discussion that both acknowledges the differences in these industrial corridors and discusses them as part of the larger Chicago economy. The other thing I think you'll notice is that some of the industrial corridors almost directly overlay with the most burdened communities in Chicago. And the burden map, I should explain a little bit more, is a combination of two general categories of data that we have on hand. And this is data that we took from the US EPA. It first accounts on the one hand for a number of environmental exposures. So things like air quality, diesel truck traffic, proximity to hazardous waste facilities. On the other hand, it also combines those with socio-demographic characteristics like race, like income, like level of education, And it puts them all together into a 10-point scale. And what it basically says is that the environmental burdens that people experience in their lives are not separable from their sociodemographic situation, that the same amount of pollution does not impact everybody the same, and that there is a very important interplay between people's vulnerability to pollution and their socioeconomic status. And so what you see here is a very clear picture where folks who are poor, folks who are Black, folks who are brown are bearing a disproportionate burden of the industrial corridor pollution in Chicago. And I should say this is not just the industrial corridors themselves. Obviously, there's a significant contribution from the transportation corridors as well. And these maps are not surprising to folks who work in my line of work in environmental justice, but I think what is new is a growing recognition that these kinds of disparities exist, that they have to be addressed, at the root cause of some of these issues, which is not just, oh, the market distributed things these ways, but that we have had policies at the zoning level, at the public health level, throughout Chicago's history that have actually created this map and that continue to enforce it over time. So if we flip to solution, I should say too, Christina, if you could put up the other map that I came prepared with. Take a pause for a second. This next map that Christina is going to put up is not one that we generated, but one that the Chicago Department of Public Health generated. And it is the childhood opportunity map for the city of Chicago. Because I think, we talk a lot about jobs, we think about adults going out in the workforce. What we really need to be discussing is the long-term economic opportunities within these communities and what the prospects of a child being born today has if they grow up in these places. And you'll see some very interesting similarities between the environmental cumulative impacts map that we were just looking at and the childhood opportunity index within the city of Chicago, with extremely low opportunity areas in that lower southeast quadrant and similarly low opportunities in the sort of I-55 corridor along the southwest, west, and near southwest sides. So for me, a job discussion is not just about who can we put to work quickly. And I think the other topic that I think is important to revisit is the fact that this COVID moment, as we're calling it, is a time to be bold. I know it's a scary time. It's a time when lots of people are out of work and we want to put people back to work very quickly. But I think it's also an unprecedented opportunity to take a step back and say, maybe we shouldn't be doubling down on the things that we've always done. Maybe we need to shift directions or ask, are the things that we are doing to try to lift people up into better opportunities, are those actually delivering? And are they actually delivering on a long-term equitable basis? So I heard earlier today that, we've got these incredible growth opportunities in industrial corridors. The vast majority of that growth opportunity is coming from the logistics and warehousing sector. And basically what it means is that Amazon has decided it is going to focus on Chicago as one of its biggest build-out locations for warehouses in the country. And what that means is there's a big land grab to build warehouses, to bring more diesel trucks into the city center, into the core. And it's primarily to serve the people who are Amazon's customers, which is a wide range of people recognizing. But it disproportionately benefits those who have the incomes to be spending on items from Amazon. The other irony, I think, in looking at that job growth is that if you look at the COVID map and you talk about who has been vulnerable to the virus, it's a lot of workers in the logistics sector. So we are taking a moment of opportunity and we're seeking to double down on the very sectors that have in fact made our population vulnerable to this virus. And there's a real tension there in my mind that says, is that really where we want to be putting all of our money and all of our development dollars right now? I think to sort of back out to the opportunity again, this land will get developed once or twice in the next couple of decades. Once you build these massive facilities, they are there. And that's what you get for development for quite a while. And I think we saw something similar in the big box push of a couple of years ago, where you have this big rush to build facilities because an external large corporation wants to put a structure in a place to serve its economic purposes. And then you fast forward 2 decades, and all of a sudden, all of that investment is gone. And it's a very boom or bust cycle. There's no diversity of opportunity. There's very little that remains locally in terms of value when those types of jobs go away. So I think one of the questions we have to ask ourselves is, is that the kind of investment we want to make? Are we investing in the other aspects of what makes an equitable and healthy economy, which are things like education, which are social services, which are childhood services as well, in the same places that we're investing to bring jobs? I also I see David's comment that Amazon's entire fleet will be electric in the next 3 years. It's not right now. And what is Chicago doing to ensure that any kind of benefits on the electrified vehicle side actually go first to the communities like to Little Village and to places that have disproportionately held the burdens over time? So again, I think, is Amazon really delivering like soup to nuts, deep economic value to these communities? Is it creating limitations on other opportunities that could grow there? I think those are all the issues that we need to grapple with. And just to pull back to solutions, part of what we are in deep discussions with the city about is, what are those kind of baseline rules that have been holding some of these areas in their current cycle of heavy industry? What are the things that we need to change to make sure that every single toxic waste facility doesn't end up on the southeast side? What are the things that we have to do to make sure that where we are incentivizing industry to locate near homes, that industry is as green as it possibly can be in terms of its impact on the local community? So again, a lot of these are individual policy solutions, but they're all being pulled together with a lens to ensuring that there are equitable opportunities, that the opportunities are green, that they create value at the local level, as opposed to just creating more jobs for people to walk into and leave at the end of the day. I really look forward to working with a number of folks. David, if you could stop sending chats at the same time that I'm talking, that would be helpful. It's really distracting.
David, we're going to come back to you in two seconds. Thank you, Malia. I want to invite Delmar to jump in here for any thoughts on policy changes needed to really unlock the potential of the kind of work that you're doing in the clean energy sector.
Yes, and thanks again, Josh. I would say the biggest policy initiative that we're really looking at is the Clean Energy Jobs Act, where the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition is working with several state legislators to come up with some approaches to increase the labor force participation of underserved communities in the clean energy economy. The Clean Energy Jobs Act is centered around creating high quality, well-paying jobs in underserved communities in energy efficiency and solar and in the renewable space. So we're really excited to engage in that dialogue. There's also several other plans and approaches that are out there as well. And so the Clean Jobs Coalition is always looking to work with others and partner on coming up with the best approach. But fundamentally, as I mentioned earlier, the thing that we're really locked in and focused on is the creation of jobs and opportunities, and then leveraging underserved communities to not only take advantage of those jobs, but also have the benefits of those programs in underserved communities. So that we are seeing solar in neighborhoods that you typically wouldn't think you would see a lot of solar development. We're building programs to make sure there's free access or low cost access to folks that maybe can't afford paying out of pocket for a solar array. We're also doing things like we're looking at opportunities to better engage returning citizens because oftentimes once they are no longer incarcerated, finding good opportunities for them, there have been limitations. And so the programs that we're looking to create will create jobs and opportunities for them. lastly, I would say one of the most important aspects of the clean of CEJA, or the Clean Energy Jobs Act, is that it's not just a urban solution. The program will really be a statewide program that focuses on both our cities as well as our community co-ops, and has a large presence in Southern Illinois. And lastly, I'll kind of end where I started with my comments previously, which is that the partnership aspect of it is critical. Being able to partner with organizations and educational institutions like the city colleges was a major component of our current programs, and we're looking to continue to partner with organizations and educational institutions like city colleges. We're also working with organizations in the community like Blacks in Green and Sustainable Options for Urban Living, and the Renaissance Collaborative. And the key message there is, if you're not working with and in the communities on these solutions and having community ownership of these programs, eventually they're not going to be as successful as they could be. So we really want to center our programs in the community, have community ownership of those programs, and then see the communities benefit when the jobs and the program opportunities manifest themselves.
Thanks, Delmar. Before I ask David for an answer, same question, I just want to note, so we have about 10 minutes left in the Q&A. We do have some questions from the audience. They seem to be falling into a couple of different categories, as well as some that are coming into the chat. So Dave, I'm going to ask for your take on needed policy, planning, or infrastructure investments in Chicago, whether it's on the south side or anywhere in the city, to really move us forward. And then we'll move to these two sort of themes that I'm getting from the Q&A. So Dave, your take on additional policy investments or infrastructure.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think part of this is really more intentional industrial planning. I think that you know, and you know, we've been kind of a part of this. It's the city has identified these industrial corridors, but they really haven't gone to the next level of making kind of the infrastructure investments needed to get these sites where they're environmentally clean or pad ready, so that so the developers and companies can execute on their project. And so in some ways we're behind what other municipalities are doing. There are a lot of areas of the country, including areas in the Midwest and Indiana, where governments are making those kind of upfront infrastructure investments and planning, doing more kind of intentional industrial planning. That has not been a priority for the city for many, many years. And so I guess I'm hopeful that you know, with the Invest Southwest and some of the other initiatives that Mayor Lightfoot has outlined, that we'll see more intentional planning around these industrial corridors, where you can make those upfront investments, put in the roads, the sewers, the transportation infrastructure, and be able to really kind of advance these more quickly. I think we oftentimes lose opportunities, job generating opportunities, because we don't have sites that are pad ready. And so when we get into these kind of competitions with other places, we're at a disadvantage because we don't have those kind of shovel ready sites. So that would be my top priority. I think, in addition to that, going back to what Karen said, I do think that there's got to be more investments in job readiness, job training, workforce initiatives to prepare the labor force for these new jobs. And so I think those are kind of the two priorities that I would look for.
Thanks, Dave. So two themes that I'm seeing in both the comments from the chat, the questions from the Q&A, and then trickled in through everybody's feedback here. There seems to be one set of questions about, it's nice that we have these programs. What do we need to do to provide to individuals to help them get through them all? So are there additional wraparound services for individuals so that they can go from program to program to program to program? So I'm going to ask that of some of the folks that are more workforce oriented here. The other is we have, there's obviously TIF, which is like the charismatic megafauna of economic development incentives. But there are many economic development incentives, and it feels like this is a moment where not only is industry transitioning in land uses, but in this moment of taking into account some of the unintended or intended effects of some of these incentives, what is the reform, modernization, oversight strategy for TIF, for other incentives that are leading to some of the outcomes that everyone is talking about? So I'm going to ask the workforce question first, and anybody that wants to jump in, I see Karen nodding her head, so she's going to get to answer first. And then I'll ask this question about that sort of policy reform or modernization of the economic development incentives. So Karen, take it away, and then if anybody else wants to weigh in on this.
So I'll just touch the first point. So around the wraparound services and support services, again, all of this work is sort of spread out across these different, what are called entitlement funds. So, you know, across like SNAP and TANF and WIOA, which is the program we run. You know, there's wraparound services are rolled into all of these different pieces. What we really need is to bring all of that together so that it's distributed, as opposed to people hopping from program to program to program. That is not as effective as when you roll all those pieces together and target them towards a particular group of individuals or a particular individual. You then, you know, layer in all the dollars, you support them to exit, to program exit, program completion, and send them on their merry way, as opposed to people trying to figure out where to go to access dollars here and access this support. If we had everything all together, it would just be a heck of a lot more effective. And there are a lot of states that have done that. So for example, in California, all of their workforce development, regardless of what the source of federal dollars might be, it's all housed together in one agency. It all gets meted out at one time, as opposed to what we're doing, which is piecemeal, and it's not helpful. It doesn't help us build scale. It doesn't help us be really intentional about how those dollars get distributed either.
Thanks, Karen.
Josh,
yeah, Delmar, yep.
I would like to just kind of pick up where Karen left off, and what she highlighted is definitely a major concern, and we wrestled with that, is how do you bring all these pieces together for a unified solution for someone? One of the biggest lessons learned, I think, that we had was around community engagement and communication. There was funding available to actually support the training program and to some degree the job, the hiring, recruiting, and job retention. But one of the things that we really noticed there was a need around was the initial community engagement around what are the opportunity, who are the best fits for these programs, and how do these programs tie in with things that are currently going on in the community. And unfortunately, the way it kind of manifests itself is that you have funded partners that are working on the programs, and then the community organizations are being asked to step in and help, often either not being funded or not having enough funding. And so one of the things I would really like to see as we start to look at these programs is, in addition to the wraparound services consolidation that Karen talked about, is also focusing some energy on the community engagement component, the communication, and then how are these programs tied in with things that are already happening in the community, so the community can support the programs and the programs are supporting community priorities.
Thanks, Delmar.
And Josh?
Yeah, Chris, yeah.
Well, I was just going to add, you brought up the whole conversation about TIF and incentives. And I think there needs to be at least an acknowledgement that when you think about the southwest side of the city, so roughly, you know, along either side of I-55, but really touching down towards I-94, potentially down to 64th Street and Woodlawn, there's a concentration of intermodal and freight activity there that's really unique on a North American scale. And I think we need to look at that as, you know, today, if I'm a resident of the south and southwest sides, I have all the downsides of that, meaning lots of truck traffic and very few benefits, meaning, you know, if you look at, say, Alliance in Texas, these new purpose-built locations, we see higher value manufacturing being built across the street from intermodal. So again, how do we come up with a set of strategies that maximize the upside from these complex locations and really start to minimize the downside? I know in my conversations with Bill, we really start to get into this conversation about, you know, fleet electrification, especially the drayage trucks that are moving these containers around. How do we come up with a set of policy levers that go way beyond TIF to think about ways that actually improve the predictability of freight, but also reduce the chances that, we're really creating a set of compounding issues for neighborhoods that really make it much more difficult to even try to get ahead. So I think a set of a much bigger conversation than just TIF about how we talk about, is it a set of new regulations on trucks? Is it a set of taxes on intermodal lifts? But a much bigger conversation about how we manage what is a really unique environment in a North American context, I think is important.
Thanks, Chris. If I can, since Dan's here, what is your take? What is the city's vision for utilization of economic development incentives, planning, or anything else to get to the kind of job-based environmental conditions, neighborhood health that I think folks are all aspiring to, but obviously running up against obstacles to getting it? Where does the city go from here on any of those things? And you're on mute right now.
Josh, on overall tax incentives, that's the question?
Tax incentives, economic development incentives, how do we move to a 2020, 2021 version of these economic development incentive tools and planning practices to get to the city that we want?
Yeah, 2021 is ambitious. I think like maybe 2001.
Sure, modernizing to some extent, yes.
Yeah. So the system clearly is just not working, and so we're starting with TIF and just changing the governance and decision-making processes and attaching performance measures to how we allocate incentives. Obviously, some of these are state laws like TIF. That even if the mayor had a plan for how to exactly reform those, it's a long-term effort. So in the short term, we're just changing who's involved. So for example, Candace Moore, our Chief Racial Equity Officer, literally sits at the table when TIF allocations are being made, and she and her team are able to provide not just opinions, but an actual racial equity assessment of those impact assessment of those potential awards. So who's at the table and how we are assessing success and intent, I think, is our approach in the short term, which is just kind of, I'd say, a quality control measure. And I think clearly before us, that was just not the case. That there was arbitrary rationale there, and I think we see that in terms of where these allocations have gone, as well as how they've been tied to outcomes like quality jobs, like changing neighborhood trajectories, like durable place-based investments that can catalyze the return of private capital. That just hasn't happened at the scale of the project and the dollars that have been allocated from the city. So I think we kind of own up to that and change who's involved and how we want to assess success, and then pursue the longer-term strategy of changing the laws that actually can move away from a trickle-down approach and a kind of technocratic, please, sir or ma'am, invest here, and instead really change the landscape of place-based investment to get at a labor strategy that would allow for us to really not just encourage, but actually enforce outcomes.
Great, thank you, Dan. I want to invite Olga in here for some final thoughts on needed reform and change, and then unfortunately we're done. I have to hand it off to Denise to wrap us up. So, Olga, some quick final thoughts.
Yeah, so I just want to give some more examples of some things that on the policy side that I think really need to be changed. For instance, we have a sustainability matrix that I think needs a lot of work. A lot of companies score high in the sustainability matrix, but that doesn't reflect on how they impact the community and public health. Also, we sometimes pat ourselves on our back about policies that have changed, but then we work in all these variances. So then the companies can apply for exceptions to these rules, and then that's messed up because most of the time they get them, and the time that they haven't got them, it's because we had to literally lawyer up with several lawyers, to Malia being one of them, to talk about how these variances actually are not going to be beneficial for the people in the community, and they don't go far enough to protect us. So all around the way that permitting and zoning is done in the city of Chicago, one is it's not keeping just like the air quality and like protective enough of the land where those industries are located, and then the health of the people. So I think moving forward, you know, all the people who are on this panel, you know, some of you we're already working with Delmar and other folks, but I just want to say that, you know, our door is open. Like, we want to see how we can work together so that you, as a more robust workforce and opportunities in our city, that they're also including public health and into that equation. And then that way we could actually have communities across the city of Chicago that are going to be healthy communities. People are going to want to stay and live and work and play.
Thank you, Olga. Thank you very much. And thank you all. I know we didn't have enough time we didn't have enough time. So thank you all for being here today. And I want to pass it off to Denise to say just a couple final thoughts. And thank you for all our attendees as well.
Yeah. Thanks, Josh. And I want to thank MPC again on behalf of AECOM. I think this is a great partnership. And I want to thank all the panelists. This was a really, really interesting talk today. I think we really made clear the things that need to be solved, things such as equity and the policy decisions that affect that. The jobs, whether it's for CPS students or for adults, and quality of life, which is impacted by all of those decisions. But at the same time, we have a lot of strengths, and I think we should not forget that. We have a huge vocational job market. We talked about so many positions that need to be filled, which I think a lot of cities would love to have that problem. We have city colleges, which is such a jewel for us. And as David said, we have an incredible transportation system. So we have a lot of things going for us. I think we can always focus on the positive. And I think to get there, it's communication, and it's communication with panels like this, where we run the gamut and have everybody who can really, you know, bring great solutions to the table and give us great ideas. So again, thanks to everybody. It was a great way to spend the afternoon with all of you, and I look forward to seeing you all again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.